Welcome to Mad-Zen. Today, I I can't help myself, and I know people are tired of politics and they're tired about hearing about COVID-19 and all the various things that are just this constant source of stress. And I absolutely understand that. However, there are things that I feel we need to stop and pay attention to be able to prevent this from being the kind of thing that holds us hostage and keeps us stressed out as Americans day in and day out of our lives. So this is about what COVID-19 is teaching us, or at least I hope what it does teach us. These are things that we should already know, but this is a blaring flashlight on certain issues that I think don't get enough voice, don't get enough light shined on them, and they're the real root of why we are where we are right now. So there's kind of two different approaches to the presidential election from the Democratic side. There is the Joe Biden side of his campaign centers around the moral and motto of a return to normal, right? His whole thing is he just wants to end the Trump campaign, end everything that he's been doing, and get us back to the country that we were before Trump. And then there's the Bernie Sanders side of it, where he's talking about we need radical, massive, systemic change to so many things, and the time for that change is now. They're both very alluring to different portions of our population, and I want to warn the folks who are comfortable with the return to normal, which was the main thing that made Biden the front runner, was everyone was saying he's the one that's most electable and has the best shot of beating Trump. My question is, why is a return to normal a good thing? Because right now, COVID-19 is showing the American norm, the America that we had before Trump was elected or anything like that, is the America that is falling apart at the seams because of one pandemic. Now, yes, absolutely, a pandemic is nothing small. It's a huge item, but it takes something this big for Americans to actually stop and see just how many different ways we've allowed ourselves to be this vulnerable. We have the American norm is most people don't have any kind of decent health care. The American norm is the number one cause of bankruptcy is medical bills. The American norm is everything that we needed here for this emergency, and just everything that we need on a daily basis. Most of the things we need in life are made in other countries, and that makes us dependent on those other countries when we need those things. Now, under normal circumstances, yeah, if everything's going fine, that's really not that big of a deal. You're not going to notice it, which is why that return to normal sounds so nice, because people forget that normal is unprepared. Normal is dependent on others to provide for us. Sure, we've got the money to buy those products, but imagine if this pandemic never got out of China. It just locked down and messed up China across the board. And in no way am I wishing that. I'm just saying hypothetically, even if it never touched anywhere else, China makes so many things that we're dependent on, medical supplies and, just everyday groceries and all these various things. The economy took a huge hit, partially because if China goes on lockdown, even if 90% of the parts you need for something don't come from China, you can't ship out this item without that last 10%. I mean, it's not a finished product without those other items that do come from China. And then we've got so many other things that it's 100% from someplace other than here. Right now, we're seeing that in something as simple as ventilators and masks. We're actually, state by state, they're competing with each other, trying to outbid each other to buy supplies that have to come from some other country, and other countries are bidding for those same things as well. So countries that are able to make them on their own aren't selling them, they're using them in their country. We aren't able to make them. Private sector people, without the federal government stepping in, because they've just kind of sat there and not done much, private companies are trying to figure out how to do this, to step up and help out, because their workers are the ones being affected by this. And if the workers go away, their company goes under. So don't make the mistake that it's this altruistic, oh, they're such amazing companies. Yeah, they're better than the ones who aren't stepping up, but it is a bottom line kind of thing. If their employees all get sick and die and the economy falls apart and all their customers are sick and can't buy their products, then they go out of business. Everything here is a bottom line, how does it affect the profits kind of thing, which is a huge portion of why we're in the spot that we're in. And it isn't Trump's fault. I don't like him, and anyone who's ever met me knows I have very, very strong feelings about all the political things that are in motion. But where we're at, the normal for America has been built up over decades of us choosing employers and corporations' profits over the needs and the welfare of the actual citizens in America. Because that's why jobs moved overseas. We give tax breaks and we make it more profitable for a company to pay, and I'm just making up numbers here, but it's an extreme, but it's, a good comparison. If I can pay somebody $1 an hour in some other country to make my product in a sweatshop, why would I pay minimum wage or better to American people and have to pay American property taxes and American, things like that here to have that exact same thing made here? Even with the cost of shipping it over, it's cheaper for me as a company, and I make more profit to have it made by a sweatshop in a country where they don't care about labor laws, and that's why they can pay so low. They make it under the worst possible conditions there, and then they ship it here, and I still saved a ton of money. So over decades, making corporations more important than the citizens, we have slowly but surely churned America into a place where all we are is we're customers. We are not making anything. It's all being made somewhere else. We're completely dependent on all these various things. And because corporations are more important than the welfare of the citizens, that's the only reason why we're the only major democracy left on the planet, the only one that has no free healthcare for its citizens. I mean, think about that. We always say we're the number one country in the world, but we're literally the only major democracy. We're the only developed nation on the planet who simply getting sick will cause you to go bankrupt. People have to choose between, do I feed my children or pay my rent, or do I go to the hospital about this thing that may kill me? And those priorities, people die all the time in this country because they avoid seeing doctors and they avoid going to the hospital because they just can't afford it. The standard American cannot afford a $400 emergency. $400. Just to ride in an ambulance is more than that. So if something horrible happens to you, and people don't voluntarily get in an ambulance, something happened to you and you are put in an ambulance. Like the vast majority of people don't go, hey, I want to take an ambulance instead of a cab. No, something bad happened to you. It wasn't part of your plan for the day. So you don't see this coming. And people can always say, well, that won't happen to me because I just won't do that. No, things happen to people all the time. And you are put into that ambulance while you're unconscious or delirious or bleeding or whatever. And now just that alone is more than the $400 that most Americans have the ability to handle. And that's a scary number. When just the very first step of the most common emergency, something happening to you physically, like car accident, fall off a ladder, anything that, some weirdo just jumps you and punches you in the face really hard, whatever, anything that requires a hospital, the very act of just getting you to the hospital, we're not even talking about any of the expense of the doctors, the endless tests, and the overpricing of everything in the American medical system. Without any of that, just the ride to get there is more than most people can afford as an emergency. So this is a terrifying kind of thing where we really need to think about that and recognize that the American norm is not where we need to be. We honestly do need to make massive changes. And what COVID-19 is doing is, in the most frightening and horrible way possible, it's showing us where all those places are that we've allowed ourselves to become weak and vulnerable because some big companies' profits are more important than our citizens' lives. Something like unemployment, right? We had the highest jump in unemployment in American history. 3-something million people applied for unemployment the other week. The high before that was 700,000 people applying in the same week, or in 1 week. So that's a massive jump. And it's all because most of those people weren't even sick. Most of those people are being laid off because there's quarantines in their areas, and those restaurants and bars and things like that are being told we have to close down for the greater good so more people don't get sick. And yes, that is a good thing. We need to be able to tell people this is what science says. The only way to get rid of this is to have the incubation period of 14 to 18 days roughly, where nobody's in contact with anybody else. If we could pull that off and literally everyone in the country stayed away from everyone else in the country for that time frame, the pandemic would wipe itself out, because that's how long it lives. It needs to move on to other people to be able to continue. So if we spent 14 days where we literally actually followed science rules and stayed away from each other the way we're supposed to, 100%, 14 to 18 days, it would be gone and done. That would be all it would take. But obviously we can't do that. And especially in a system where people can't afford to not go to work. I mean, if people are choosing between feeding their kids and going to the doctor, they're definitely having to choose between whether or not I can afford to miss time at work. And over 50% of, people employed in this country don't have any kind of protection for that. And even with the things that we're trying to do as a temporary fix, the Paid Sick Leave Act, they weren't applying it to people who employ 500 or more employees. Now, mind you, those are the companies that can actually afford to do it and should have already had it in place. But those companies are not being required to do it. And that's like 54% of the working force in this country are employed by those companies. They're not being forced to do it. Amazon is one of the biggest, richest companies. That owner is one of the richest men in the world. And he's putting out public requests for citizens, you and me, who are unemployed and broke. He's asking us to pony up money to pay for paid sick leave for his employees, when he paid $0 in taxes on a company that made billions of dollars in profits every year. He's one of the richest men in the world, and he's asking us to pay for his employees to be able to stay home if they're sick and help keep America alive and well. Because if you're sick, don't go to work. But I absolutely understand those people who, if I don't go to work, I'm homeless in 2 weeks. That's not a fair choice to make. And that unfair choice is the American norm. What this is teaching us is that our normal is broken. Other countries already have it in place where you can't tell an employee how many sick days they're allowed to have, because they recognize sickness isn't a choice. It just happens. There's numerous countries where if you get sick, you go to the hospital, it is just taken care of. And people always love to argue, oh, well, those healthcare systems are awful. Trust me, if you actually look at the numbers, not the bullshit propaganda given to you by politicians who their paychecks depend on keeping their donors happy, if you ignore those guys and just look at the reality of the numbers of where we're ranked on our healthcare system versus all those countries where it's free, we are not better than them. Yes, America has the spot where people come to America for the best high-end, super specific, really hardcore surgeries. Yeah, we're really good at that. But overall healthcare system, we are ranked insanely low compared to other countries. And even if we were exactly the same, if you have to choose between a bad healthcare system that's free or another bad healthcare system that will make you go bankrupt just for using it, well, that's an obvious choice for a real person who has real bills and isn't rich and isn't dependent on donations from pharmaceutical companies and big oil and all these other places to say what they want them to say. Real people have to deal with the reality that those fuckers allowed to happen. And that's why corporations are more important than us, because I, as a single citizen, I don't have a lobbyist. I can't donate millions of dollars to their campaigns, so obviously I'm not their priority. If real people were the priority, a right to work state wouldn't exist. It literally does nothing for me as an employee for a rule to exist in my state where my boss can fire me at any time for no reason and never have to tell me why they got rid of me. They just say, oh, it's a right to work state. I don't have to keep you employed ever, and I never have to follow any kind of rules or guidelines. I can literally just say, I don't want you anymore. Get out. But now, most states in America have right to work in place. How did this even happen? How is it a thing that in America, the company has more rights than the employee, and the simple act of getting sick is the number one reason for bankruptcy? No one should have to choose between feeding their children or actually seeing a doctor to just stay alive. And COVID-19 is teaching us where all those different weaknesses are. Unemployment benefits don't apply to a huge chunk of our country, and not because they're not working. These people are waiters, waitresses, artists, freelance people, contract workers, all those people that aren't paying taxes to a company for unemployment, but they're still paying taxes. Like, all of those people still pay taxes, but because of those loopholes that the government has put in to make companies more important than us as individuals, they don't have an unemployment tax bucket just set aside for those people. And it's a loophole so that companies can afford to be cheaper and make more profits. I personally have a friend who works 40 hours a week, every week, full-time employment, and has done it for years for a company that has them labeled as a contractor. So they don't have unemployment, they don't have benefits, but that's the only way the company would hire them, is as a contractor. How is that even legal? They're doing the exact same number of hours as anyone else. They've been working for this place for years, and that same company has employees that the only difference is they're in the office doing a slightly different job. You know, this person's an artist. There's other people in the office who file paperwork and that kind of stuff. They work in the building the same number of hours, same amount of time, but they are required to have benefits, and that includes sick paid leave, that kind of thing. They get unemployment because the company is taking taxes out of their paycheck instead of this other person. Because this other person is an artist, they're a designer. The things that they do are really the backbone of this entire company. And yet, because they're an artist, we get to call them a contractor. They pay their own taxes, which means unemployment isn't done. They just pay into the regular taxes that everyone else also has to do. Well, why is that okay just because they're an artist and this person, answers phones? Why is a waiter or a waitress less important than someone who just answers a phone inside an office, telemarketers or whatever? All these various jobs, there is no difference in reality between the value of these employees and how important their lives are, whether or not they deserve the right to, have paid sick leave and to have benefits and things like that, than any other employee. The reality is, someone somewhere years ago, it wasn't even a recent thing, so I'm not trying to blame Trump for it, but the normal America said corporations are more important, so they found loopholes to say, oh, if I call them this kind of employee, then I don't have to pay for benefits, even though I work them just as hard and I work them for just as many hours, and they are a backbone part of my company. I couldn't run my company without these people, but I want to find as many ways as possible to label someone contractor instead of full-time employee so that I, as the employer, don't have to pay for those benefits. They got to figure that out on their own. We slowly and surely over the course of decades allowed our own people to become less and less protected, less and less important. And that's what this is really showing. We are learning the hard way that a temporary fix isn't what we need. We need to change the system and reimagine the importance of individual citizens instead of the importance of some company who they always get bailouts. Every time something happens like this, we hand over trillions of dollars without blinking an eye to help out the economy, which isn't people. People are dying because they don't have health coverage, and they're acting like, oh, well, we'll talk the insurance companies into not charging you for the test, but we won't make them pay for the actual treatment. We're going to leave you on your own to go bankrupt. So you still, for free, you can find out you've got COVID-19, and then you as an individual have to decide whether or not you can handle going bankrupt in exchange for treating it. That's not right. And this is what America's normal is. We can't fall for that, that lullaby platitude, of a return to normal. America is broken. And all COVID-19 is doing is shining a very horrendously bright spotlight on all of those weak points that we've spent decades allowing to happen, because they sneak it in a little bit at a time. We're incrementally becoming used to being mistreated while still being told this is the greatest place in the world. Other countries are paying automatically, and it's built in and was there before this happened. It wasn't a temporary measure to give relief. No, it was already there. If you're sick, the government, using your tax dollars, would pay for like 80% of your wages, and the employer would pay for the other 20, something along those lines, so that you're trapped in your house, but you aren't stressed out about whether or not you're going to get another paycheck. You can actually afford to just stay at home and keep people healthy and safe by not exposing yourself to others and by not exposing them to you. But here, we have to choose between bankruptcy and staying alive, and that's the American norm. And I hope, if anything out of this huge pandemic, no, we should not have lost lives. No, we shouldn't have had to go this far to see where we're so weak. But if we're lucky, the one good thing that will come from this is that this number of people getting sick and this number of people dying will force every demographic, no matter what your political leanings are, no matter how rich or poor you are, hopefully all these people going through this together will see things need to change. We can't allow ourselves to be this vulnerable ever again. And I hope that we learn that lesson. So I'm done with my rant. Welcome to Mad-Zen. It kind of falls under the action equals belief. You can find your inner peace through fighting that good fight and knowing that you're doing what you feel is morally right and making those changes that we need to change. Zen isn't about sitting peacefully and quietly while the world mistreats you. Part of Zen is standing up for what you know needs to change and finding that comfort in you helped bring that change that we all need. So I hope people see this and get mad at what's going on around them and actually find that Mad Zen in going out and making the changes that need to be made. So again, welcome to Mad Zen, and my rant is done.